So in terms of then turning to what's really going to drive how you are all going to have to start thinking about what it's going to mean, NBN, and I reiterate, is a wholesale provider. We're coming, and it's time for all of you to consider your own business models. I'm not here to tell you how to do it all and all that sort of thing. It's not my gig, but I suppose I can give you a forewarning of what's been around. So there's been a lot of literature on the implications of broadband, and someone I recommend to you is Anderson's Long Tail to Wikonomics to the recent book by Howarth called A Faster Future. And most of the available literature will draw on three themes that to be expected. And one is that access to internet and connectivity will generally be ubiquitous, portable and faster. The second thing is that the devices that connect us will be plentiful and more powerful, and both the access piece and the connectivity piece will be obviously subject to Moore's law and drive down price and processing power over time. What's getting a lot of attention at the moment is outsourcing via the cloud for skills, and labour, which has facilitated websites like freelancer.com, 99 Designs and Design Crowd, which you may be partly familiar with. But this is all about making sure that people can go to a place, bid for a job and compete against the rest of the world for that. And at the end of last year, the Sydney-based freelancer.com had over 2 million users and had worked on over 890,000 projects with US 71 million paid out to them. So there's some pretty big metrics for something that started around a dining room table. The business models can flip really, really quickly, and when things move from the physical to the virtual. So as Netflix demonstrated, Blockbuster declared its bankruptcy midway through last year. And Netflix has been one of the major contributors to traffic in the US. So just as the Industrial Revolution facilitated mass migration, the digital revolution may have a similar effect, but maybe in the reverse, while people can stay in their hometowns, even stay at home, without a need to live and work directly in the guts of major metropolitan cities. So maybe AD Hope's evocative words in the lovely poem Australia and her 5 cities like 5 teeming sores may need another iteration once the digital revolution has finally arrived. So what that means for all of you here is that more people are going to be accessing your content, but it's really going to have to change to be easier to find, which may involve requiring things like greater attention to search engine optimization, to search engine marketing, and to content aggregators that are really not necessarily your traditional channels. And your content is obviously going to have to be compelling enough to get across the noise, because global access is also going to mean global competition for content, and created in multiple formats. Because as people migrate to high-definition devices, they pick up things like iPhones, which can also be used obviously on the NBN, despite the amount of large confusion, particularly in segments of the media. iPads, iPhones, all those sorts of devices will be operating on fibre, and they'll be using the last mile of spectrum in the house, which is radio spectrum, to access it. So it's not as if the NBN is somehow going to be made obsolete by mobile phone networks. They are complementary, they're certainly not substitutes. So as you think about how all of your content is going to be rendered into high-definition televisions, into mobile phone devices, into all those sorts of formats, a lot of thought and planning may have to go into how all of that gets put together. So you've heard very quickly in the fast-forward version of why we're building an NBN, how we're configuring some of it, and some of the experiences of the people using it now. So wherever we look in the whole world, whether it's democracy unfolding in the Middle East, whether it's the future of Japan's displaced families, or whether we're looking at new carbon abatement solutions, it really is access to robust and affordable telecommunications infrastructure that makes the difference. And after all, isn't that why we all turn up to work in the first place? Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Cassandra. I know that you are based in Canada. recently, and I was wondering there, when they had the introduction of much faster, much improved broadband speeds, etc., there's apocryphal evidence that that obviously had a roll-on to effect to what was happening with local content, because obviously it opened the gateways to everybody to be able to, access whatever they wished, and there wasn't necessarily enough local content to fill the void, so they went elsewhere. What were your observations, and how do you see that perhaps with the Australian experience?
Canada ended up adopting, and I take this, I suppose, my NBN hat off, this is just my personal observations of what happened in Canada. What the Canadian policymakers decided to do was make anyone who was holding a broadcasting licence responsible for contributing a percentage of their revenue towards the production of Canadian content. In addition to making a compulsory production element, there was also a compulsory viewing component. So I was working at the time for Manitoba Telecom Services, and they were going into the television space to compete with the cable companies. And there was a requisite percentage of local content that had to be shown, and there were also requisite hours during which that content had to be shown. That's all well and good under a broadcast model, but obviously when you take the broadcast element out and look at it into a converged model, when everyone's accessing everything online, the dynamics obviously change. And I'm not sure that policymakers around the world have grappled with that. The other thing would be, depending upon your audience, looking at an educational context where you may then, and I think from memory some of the provinces in Canada did have a compulsory level of local content that had to go into their curriculums when illustrating examples. So you couldn't just go onto YouTube and get any old thing, it had to be Canadian.
Simon Crean announced a couple of weeks ago that there was a cultural fund associated with the NBN, that funds would be made available to parts of the cultural sector as part of the NBN rollout.
Getting arts online, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to direct you towards Simon Crean's department. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers or how to get access to the funds. I know that it is all online in terms of the eligibility criteria and all that sort of thing, but the federal government has obviously acknowledged that they do need to put some resources behind getting the sector very much online.
You mentioned the wholesale nature of the NBN and its service provision to the various retail providers. Do you anticipate that the retail providers will be offering the same points of difference that they do now in the existing telecoms arrangements with Telstra? That is basically about price and plans and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. That is what we anticipate. We did a whole lot of deep dive sessions with retail service providers, and that's how we ended up with the access price component and what they call the connectivity or ABC and CVC price components. And it's that connectivity price component which enables providers that are high-end providing things to business to be able to differentiate themselves from low-entry consumer-grade low-entry prices. So we anticipate there to be a strong amount of retail competition, but that does have a huge amount of variations for what your plans are, what your speeds are, what your caps are and all that sort of thing. We do anticipate it to shift enormously in the price department, but there will still be the variation in plans. It certainly won't be commoditised as everyone offering exactly the same thing.
So there'll be a uniform upgrade of the speeds across Australia. What about the connections to the rest of the world? Will there be some sort of bottleneck, or will those connections sort of be upgraded as well?
In terms of who's responsible for which component of the network, NBNCo is responsible for, and I'll take you back to the slide. Can you see where it has the access VC and the connectivity VC? Everything after that is the access seeker's responsibility. So it will be, again, a point of differentiation we expect between the retail service providers as to what level of backhaul they're preferred to invest in. That is not part of NBNCo's specific brief.